Republican whip.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I want to begin this morning by congratulating the South Dakota State University football team on an incredible win Saturday in Brookings, South Dakota. I happen to be on hand for this great event. Thanks to their great performance in Saturday's game, which included 5 scores in their first 5 possessions, the Jackrabbits are headed to the FCS National Championship for the second time in 3 seasons. Saturday's win is the latest in a banner season for the Jacks, who have gone 13-1 and won the Missouri Valley Conference to become the #1 seed in the FCS playoffs. Of course, Saturday's game would not have been possible without the men and women who worked to clear the roads around Brookings and the volunteers and staff who cleared the field and the seats after a major snowstorm last week. When the game got underway, temperatures were in the single digits, not including the wind chill. When you add in the wind chill, it was well below 0. I'm grateful for the hard work of all the staff who made it possible, which allowed, by the way, literally thousands of people, thousands of Jacks fans like me, to be there to cheer on our team. And remarkably, in spite of the conditions, there was a great crowd on hand to see this historic win. Mr. President, I'm looking forward to rooting for the Jacks next month when they take on the North Dakota State University Bison in the championship game in Frisco, Texas, where, hopefully, it will be a little warmer than 9 degrees. Mr. President, December 22nd will mark the 5th anniversary of the signing of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It's been 5 years since Republicans reformed the tax code to allow Americans to keep more of their hard-earned money. 5 years since we modernized the tax code to encourage businesses to invest in America and create good-paying jobs here. After 5 years since our economy started to rebound after years of stagnant wages and growth. Mr. President, Republicans know that government doesn't create jobs and that Washington can't legislate prosperity. But government can certainly get in the way of prosperity. And before tax reform, too often our tax code was getting in the way. It was taking too much money from Americans' paychecks. It was making it difficult for businesses, large and small, to create jobs, increase wages, and grow. And it contained perverse incentives for companies to park profits abroad and avoid manufacturing things here in the United States. Mr. President, Republicans knew things needed to change. And so we set to work to reform our tax code to put more money in American families' pockets and to help grow our economy. We lowered tax rates across the board and simplified the tax code so that hardworking Americans would pay less in taxes and spend less time filling them out, their forms out every April. We lowered tax rates for owners of small and medium-sized businesses, farms and ranches, and made it easier for them to recover the cost of investing in their businesses, which in turn freed up cash for them to invest in their operations and their workers. We lowered our nation's sky-high corporate tax rate, which prior to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was the highest corporate tax rate in the developed world, to make American businesses more competitive in the global economy and empower them to invest in wages and benefits for their workers. And we modernized our international tax system so that American businesses would no longer be operating at a disadvantage next to their foreign counterparts. And Mr. President, it worked. It worked. In the wake of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, wages and incomes for American workers grew. Unemployment fell to a 50-year low. The poverty rate fell to the lowest level ever recorded. African Americans and Hispanic Americans saw record low rates of poverty and unemployment. The income gap narrowed. Business investment increased. Companies created new jobs, and they invested in their employees. And they opened new opportunities for American workers by moving production and capital into the United States. Tax reform also spelled an end to the wave of companies moving their headquarters out of the United States. Prior to tax reform, there was a growing trend of corporate inversions, which is tax speak for companies picking up and moving their legal headquarters offshore. And that was due to our dysfunctional tax code. Since tax reform, there hasn't been a single U.S. corporate inversion. Let me repeat that, Mr. President. Since tax reform, there hasn't been a single U.S. corporate inversion. which means more jobs and opportunities for workers here at home. And Mr. President, contrary to claims that tax reform mostly benefited the wealthy, it was actually lower and middle income Americans who saw the greatest benefits. In fact, the top 1% of taxpayers are paying a greater share of taxes today than they were before tax reform. And I haven't even mentioned the fact that tax reform has helped result in record high revenues for the federal government. Mr. President, fortunately, we were not able to make all of the tax reform and the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act permanent, and some provisions have already begun to expire. One important pro-growth provision on its way to phase out is bonus depreciation. Manufacturers, farmers, and ranchers, and several other industries have relied on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act's bonus depreciation provision, which allows them to immediately deduct the full cost of investment in short-term assets such as machinery and equipment. But bonus depreciation will soon begin to phase down, making new investment in productive equipment a more expensive proposition for businesses of all sizes. Extending the bonus depreciation provision, or better yet, making it permanent, would not only provide certainty to American businesses, it would create tens of thousands of new jobs, increase wages, and grow our economy by making it easier for businesses to invest and expand. And it would have even more of an impact in today's high inflation environment where investment dollars are going a lot less far than they used to. In addition, under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act this year, businesses lost their ability to fully expense research and development costs in the year they incur them. Full R&D expensing is beneficial to many businesses, but it's especially important for manufacturers and for high-tech industries where cutting-edge research and development is critical for innovation and continued leadership in these fields. And for the sake of American workers and American industry, we should restore full R&D expensing. Mr. President, at the end of 2025, many of the lower tax rates for working families and small businesses will expire. Middle-income families who received a tax cut the year following tax reform will see a tax hike in 2026 if middle-income tax cuts are not extended or made permanent. Also, at the end of 2025, the increased death tax exemption level is set to expire, leaving more family, farms, and small businesses subject to this punitive tax. I've seen the consequences of the death tax when a family has to sell their farm, ranch, or small business because they don't have enough cash to pay this massive tax on their loved one's life's work. And I hope that we will not only extend the increased death tax exemption level, but will permanently eliminate this unfair tax. Mr. President, tax reform worked. It worked for American families. It worked for farmers and ranchers. And it worked for American businesses. Allowing key elements of tax reform to expire would reduce opportunity and raise taxes for hardworking Americans at a time when their pocketbooks are already strained thanks to the historic inflation crisis that Democrats have helped to create. And I hope that my colleagues across the aisle will recognize this and work with Republicans to permanently extend the expiring provisions of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and continue efforts to make the tax code simpler, fairer, and more competitive. The President likes to talk about giving families, quote, a little breathing room, end quote. Well, there's no better way to give families breathing room than by allowing them to keep more of their hard-earned money. And I hope the President will take an honest look at the success of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and come out in support of making these pro-growth policies permanent. I'm disappointed that my Democrat colleagues recently chose to forgo the chance to extend full R&D expensing and 100% bonus depreciation in the year-end funding bill. Extending these should be a no-brainer, and Democrats should not be holding these essential business credits hostage to a partisan agenda. Mr. President, tax reform helped create an economic environment that encouraged growth and set the American people up for new opportunities, higher wages, and a more secure future. It's time to build on these successes and extend the benefits of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act for the long term. Mr. President, I yield the floor.